Welcome to In These Times, a multi-platform podcast and YouTube broadcasting channel for mental health issues. We want to address mental pain and emotional suffering by bringing you information that can alleviate your distress. And you may make some important mental shifts that bring back your light, your love, your hope. Please use the Contact Us button on our website to let us know your deepest troubles and concerns with your mental health. Help us to help you. So now, Previn, Andrew has described the state we're in this country now with our mental health as a wasteland. He's talking about the way we get better. And of course, that's what we're here for on In These Times. We're determined to find ways for people to move forward after a really difficult time. So I wonder, he was not surprised by society's reaction, and he did call it a wasteland. Is that how you see it?
Yes, I think first of all, I'd like to say that Andrew Samuels is a very important figure in the landscape of counselling and psychotherapy. And certainly for those who've been working in the field, we've known him as a great campaigner. He's been very politically active with the government on many aspects of mental health policy. On the ground, he has also been very active in starting up groups, working internationally. And when Andrew says something, it is really important to listen to what he says, because it comes from a very deep political psyche. Now, I have to sadly agree with him that there is a wasteland out there as far as mental health is concerned. And this is a huge problem, but it's been a problem that's been growing for decades, which is the persistent refusal of governments to actually have something that is called a mental health policy. So, of course, there are documents that fly around Whitehall. Of course, each party touts its own little manifesto, but there is no substantial understanding of mental health policy because there is no consultation with professionals in the field.
I think it's very important for people watching that we kind of take this apart a bit, because I did try to with Andrew. So for those of you out there who are in real trouble and you think your mental health's, in a real dire state, you have probably been to a doctor, you may have been given meds. And then, if you're very, very lucky, somebody will come up with the idea that you go to the NHS cognitive behavioural therapy treatments, which he was absolutely damning about.
Andrew was talking about a watered-down version of CBT that is being spun through the NHS. There is a lot of controversy about it. If you get the champions for CBT, they will insist that they have statistics on their side that prove the effectiveness of what they do. There has been many counter studies that indicate the opposite, indicate severe problems and flaws with that statistic gathering. Now, to call it utterly useless is a bit harsh, because the question then would be, would you prefer there was nothing at all? Now, surely the answer to that is no. So, of course, we have a watered-down version of CBT. Of course, it may be not very effective, but sadly, it is something. And as long as something is there, that's got to be better than nothing at all. So if you have the chance for CBT, for goodness sake, use it. It's a great experience for you. It helps you dip your toe into the whole field of mental health. And most of all, it helps you understand that you have a mind of your own.
So we're talking about cognitive behavioural therapy, which is all that is on offer from the NHS, folks. So can we just explain, well, Andrew does it rather well, but can we just explain what it might be useful for?
It's mostly used for very high intensity conditions such as anxiety and depression. Those are the two primary targets of CBT. And what it does is it just gives you a way of containing the escalating and overwhelming feelings that come up. It does not claim to solve them completely. You cannot do that with cognitive behavioural therapy. What you can do is help sufferers to understand a little bit more about this intensity that floods them, this intensity that overwhelms them and that literally leaves them incapacitated. They can't move because the intensity is so huge. Now, at that point, there's something of a drip feed of CBT that may be useful to help that overwhelm, which of course is used in conjunction with medication, which is also trying to shut down all of your emotional responses to give you a break. And if you understand CBT from that light, it has got to have some value.
Yes, trouble is it only gives you sort of 6 to 8 weeks if you're lucky. I think we should at this point just hear what Andrew Samuels has to say, because it is pretty scathing.
So CBT is okay, but what the government offers as if it was CBT is definitely not okay.
So can you just explain who the NHS version of CBT would benefit?
Virtually nobody.
Wow. Yeah, so Andrew Samuels, of course, had a lot to say about money and cognitive behavioural therapy and the fact that to avoid it on the NHS, you have to pay pound notes. And he was very honest by saying he's a pound note therapist. And of course, that is where the difficult bit comes in, doesn't it, Previn? It's about people having to pay to get better.
Yes, there is an understandable rage and anger that you have to pay someone else from your own private pocket in order to address a mental health issue, which should either be available through the government or through insurance policies. And they're highly restrictive, they don't help the public, and so the public have to dip into their already thin purses since austerity has been climbing through this country for around 12 years. So people are enraged at the thought of parting with their hard-earned money that's very thin on the ground now and having to then pay for their mental health.
Yes, so what are we saying really? That people should actually take responsibility of their money when they want to go to therapy, and therapists are expensive. Andrew Samuels thought £40 up to about 120. So are we actually saying, Previn, are we actually saying to people that they should maybe not change the car, not go to an alternative therapist, not go to the pub and have a few beers? They should spend it all on paying for therapy?
Yes, it's a great question, and the way you've expressed it is fantastic. I mean, of course, there is a rage that people should dip into their private pockets and have to pay for something that should be part of a government-provided service, or at the very least, surely the insurance companies could make provision for mental health policies. Now, the refusal of both government and insurance policies to help mental health in any conceivable meaningful way is why people then get angry, because we've had decades of austerity and now there's a huge resentment that they have to pay for getting better. Now, the trouble with that is that your mind is priceless. And if you ask the question, what price would you put on your mind being better? What price would you put on your life being less dysfunctional, less abusive, or less toxic? And there is no price to that. So when you think about it from that perspective, it's not such a terrible crime to have to give up a holiday or a car in order to try and address some of your mental health issues.
You see, somebody watching this who's got a child in a deep state of pain and probably with an eating disorder understands what you're saying, but is outraged. And yet our politicians think, oh, well, that's it then. You know, we've got an organisation called CAMS, which will deal children and adolescent mental health services, and they'll deal with it, won't they? Except, of course, they don't.
But Andrew was very clear about that there is no mental health policy for young children, and that this is an appalling lack of provision and detrimental to the future of the nation in neglecting the next generations and their mental health issues. So I don't think that there is any way around this, that parents have to assess, do they want to look after their children? Because the horrible truth is nobody else will. And you can't keep complaining about mental health services, government policies. At some point, you have to come to that crossroads and ask yourself, can I take the jump into making a financial commitment to my child's own mental health or my own mental health, which perhaps is driving my children insane?
Well, of course, and we can say, okay, well, they should concentrate on adults. And I should just add, we hear a lot about people whose children are hitting that middle road between 16 and 18, where they no longer qualify for children's services and they haven't started qualifying for adult, even if they could get them. So that's a worrying bit, that 2 years.
Those 2 years are very, very psychologically important because they are years in which children are having to make decisions about their careers, work choices. Sexuality plays a big role, as well as relationships. Bullying is kind of coming to an end, but for those who have been bullied or feel isolated or alienated, all of this starts to accumulate between 16 and 18 when you actually have to go out into the world and there are no more places to hide.
You see, social media is a real worry, and I think the whistleblower who got up and said a piece about Facebook, where there is a lot of real sadness going on with people being made to feel fat and ugly on social media by their peers or no good for the world. I mean, what are you going to do about social media? Because children, particularly during lockdown, were on it 24/7.
Yes, but social media gets blamed now for everything, doesn't it? And that's very convenient. The real failure is not social media. The real failure is a lack of investment in mental health, which is why people are driven to social media. There's a lack of investment for young people, which is why they're driven to social media. And if you can't pay for workers, youth workers, youth community centres, you can't start blaming social media for abject failure of government policy. But it's so convenient, isn't it, to start blaming social media, which is that last resort that young people have to actually find some friends, to find some help, and to get some sense of community and break their isolation.
Well, I'm not particularly blaming them. I am blaming governments for not doing something about our children, because Andrew Samuels himself said, this is a dreadful state of affairs. And I think, it might be worth just, some children are neglected, they're abused, they've been through trauma, life's been very, very tough, their parents aren't there for them, there's no love. And I'm sure you as a therapist have come across all those problems.
Yeah, but now we're coming to the political dimension of psychotherapy and mental health services. And the hard fact is that psychotherapists have been useless in campaigning for mental health because they are not political animals. They sit in a room with one person in another chair and they try to then use their skills to alleviate or unpack or dismantle the structures of that pain in mental health. They haven't got the training or the skill sets to go to Parliament. They haven't got the skill sets to get funds to lobby. They don't understand the slightly corrupt system in which you have to pay MPs to lobby for your cause and try and table a motion in Parliament. And unfortunately, the big lobbyists are the ones with big funds. And that's how they get laws passed through Parliament. There is no private funding for lobbying in mental health. Now, we just have to accept that and rethink, how do we get mental policy as a meaningful law or act in Parliament? It won't come through complaining. There has to be some positive action which understands political process, understands the funding and lobbying issue, and then starts to act on it.
Well, I put it to Andrew that if you go and glue yourself to the M25 or you're a member of Black Lives Matter, people do listen because enough noise is made that you can't, and the media come in and everybody has something to say. So, sorry, but why aren't psychotherapists doing the same?
Well, I think something that was not fully addressed in Andrew's interview, which I'm sure he has actually got a huge amount to say, is the fact that the professions themselves, to quote Andrew, are in a state of turf wars. Now, sadly and quite ironically, psychotherapy training institutes and schools don't appear to have matured enough to work collaboratively with other different trainings. So right in their history, right at the inception, Freud, for example, threw out Alfred Adler, famously, and Carl Jung, and various other people for not following his method and his ideology. And that was this passionate concern about their truth, and at a pioneering stage, trying to find out how on earth does this stuff work. So I understand that in the origins of psychotherapy, there was a lot of infighting, there was a lot of factional division, and that, unfortunately, though, should have matured by now, and it hasn't.
So who's falling out with whom?
So Freudians fall out with Jungians, Jungians fall out with person-centered counsellors, humanist counsellors feel very outraged at the psychoanalytic traditions that look at your childhood rather than look at the human being in the present. So there is a conflicting ideology out there. Now, the professions have got to grow up. And I'm sorry if that sounds patronising, but there is an urgent public crisis. Now, if I can just use the analogy in business, when you work in a business, it is understood that everyone has to work together. People don't start fighting between each other over who runs accounts, who does manufacturing, who does the supply logistics changes. They all have to work together because otherwise the whole of the business collapses. Unfortunately, the mental health professions and psychotherapy professions are in a state of collapse. All they do is serve their own little ideological niche, and all they generate are their own methodologies. Now, that's absolutely wonderful because it's still developing. But they have to come to a point where they have the maturity to collaborate with other different schools of therapy. And that's something that hasn't really been done, certainly since I've been in the field for 20 years.
And they're going to say to you, well, that's all very well, but we've got to make some money on this. We've got to live, pay the bills. Are they going to be able to do that?
Well, that is the other problem. So when people are outraged that they have to pay a therapist, what they forget is that the therapist has usually had to go to huge personal costs from their own private funds in order to train. That's a 3-4 year training just to attend courses. And then on top of that, you have to pay for therapy because you usually have to be in therapy to qualify as a therapist. So for 3-5 years, you could be paying your therapy costs on top of funding the course, on top of the books, on top of your life, your subsistence living. So this makes it extremely hard, first of all, for people to get into the profession, and secondly, when they come to charging, because they know that people are resentful, they have to earn a living. And there's a huge outrage that they somehow have the audacity to ask for money because this is mental health suffering and they should be helping people for nothing. It's not possible.
I think the audacity only comes because the government's not providing the proper treatment. You know, we wouldn't be having this conversation if the government services were fabulous.
But the aggression directed at therapists should be directed at the government, and it isn't. So people feel enraged at the therapist for paying them rather than enraged at the government for not providing.
Well, this is all very interesting and it's very good to get some background. But meanwhile, people watching this have got children who are in deep, deep shtuck. And I mean, I can come up with so much. They may have depression, they may have self-harm, they may have Asperger's, they may have sexuality problems, anorexia. The list is endless. And what are we on in these times going to suggest to improve their lives?
All we can do is get experts in to discuss these various problems as well as share the knowledge. But my passion certainly for this project has been that professionals come out of their little cubbyholes and start sharing knowledge. And that needs to be out in the public domain. So if we can't have the skill set to lobby Parliament and raise funds and pay MPs to table a motion to pass mental health policy, if we can't do all that because it's beyond our reach, at the very least, we can try and provide information to the public in a collaborative way rather than in an aggressive, factional way. And therapists and counsellors need to start working together. The public are dying for this information. They're starved of it. And we cannot afford the luxury anymore, certainly after COVID, to simply sit back and wait for clients to call us on the phone or send us an email. There has to be another response. Now, not every therapist is politically minded in that way. Not every therapist wants to stand in front of a camera or talk to the public. But for those who can, it is very important that they get in touch with us because we are happy to provide a platform for them to speak up.
Very good. Now then, we are asking you to get in touch with us because we won't know what you're feeling or thinking otherwise, and we want to know. So we'd really like you to go on our website, ittmind.com, and get in touch through the contact us. Send your question, and that's exactly what somebody's done. So let's see. Susan, she's got children, she's in the US. She says, why, Previn, do successive governments fail to see that mental health is as serious as physical health? Just to remind you that In These Times is based on your participation. Please use the Contact Us button on our website to let us know what you'd like discussed in future programmes. Please also use the Donate button to help us make more programmes for you. Help us to help you.
First of all, mental health is invisible. It's not a broken leg, it's not a punctured lung, it's not terminal cancer. And because it goes inside somebody's head, and that's where it operates and goes on and on and on, there has been a huge difficulty in society to actually acknowledge that that is a painful experience that has acute suffering, which in some instances can take somebody's life. Now, that has not become socially accepted, and it certainly hasn't become any part of government policy, because the general attitude to mental health is go and sort yourself out, fix yourself, get your self-help books, pop a few pills, and get back to work. Now, until society shifts that, there can't be any mental health changes in government policy. The reality is government policies are only concentrated on one thing, and that is money. So money is the only value and human life has none. So the economy is simply the only determining force in political policy today. That is going to increase as fewer and fewer people get the money, and all the rest are more and more being driven into poverty and therefore mental health. Now, it will take a national crisis before governments finally are brought to their knees and actually do something about mental health. But that is the way governments function. They don't care about anything other than the economy.
And it is a world problem. And Susan's asked this question because I know the World Health Organization is saying the pandemic's disrupted or halted critical mental health services in 93% of countries, with the demand increasing. And they're not keeping pace. They're not doing anything towards it. And of course, it's exacerbated existing conditions, but also the bereavement of the pandemic, isolation, loss of income, and fear have triggered mental health illnesses all over the world.
Yes, but the world has never been responsive to mental health. The world has never wanted to look at the human mind. When Freud, Jung, Melanie Klein, Donna Winnicott were first coming out with exploring the mind and trying to find models of how the mind works, they were not heartily embraced by governments and government policy. So society has a foundational problem with the human mind. Society is organised on people not having a mind of their own. Do as you're told and get on with it. Now, because society is operated in that manner, the breakthrough of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy and mental health has been a very recent development in our evolution. And what is clear is that the human brain does not want to look at itself. It does not want to see its aggression. It does not want to see its rampant, uncontrollable urges for greed and displaced sexuality. It does not want to do that. So sex and aggression are not things that people want to look at. So we cover it over, we go to work, we dress properly, and we don't look at how all of these things suddenly start to accumulate in individuals and actually explode into a mental health crisis. Sadly, it is only when that explosion occurs that people will go and look for mental health.
Now, during the Andrew Samuels interview, we touched on what could be done for people. Is there somewhere they could go to talk about their problems? He liked, with children in mind, the Stephen Fry idea, where people walk into a shopping centre and there will be a youth worker, a counsellor, somebody who'll take the steam out of the young person who's really feeling in a real state, and possibly they could go back there weekly. He liked that. Do you like it?
Look, that's a very thin plaster on a massive problem. When Andrew Samuels talked about it, he talked about being a youth worker with very difficult youth problems, a lot of violence and so on. And it just helped young people to have someone to talk to. What's happened over time and very, very rapidly is that with the increase of urbanisation, with the increase of population densities in square miles, the conditions for young children today are getting worse and worse in terms of mental health. You also have to remember that since Andrew's time, there has been an absolute stripping off of any investment in youth community work, youth workers, community centres, and so on, because simply put, young people are not valued. They are not seen as the future of a nation. So to then try and come up with some small answer like having a youth centre, it's a great idea, but you have to have people trained.
Yeah.
And you have to have many of them. You can't just have a few.
Well, taking that idea on that people need someone to talk to who maybe isn't going to take pound notes off them, there was an experiment being done in the south of England where a group of people had got together to put on plays, and one of their number really tragically, without anybody even suspecting, took his life. And the group were flattened, as you would be. Just, they blamed themselves, everything. But what they did do, they decided after this, was that they'd meet and talk to each other about not just how they felt about this young person's death, but about how they felt. And I thought, that's got to be a very good idea. Suppose those groups could start up all over Britain, all over the world. Then I thought, maybe that's not so great, because that people do tend to run riot and you need someone to control the groups. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, group work is very, very important as a substitute for individual counselling and individual therapy. That is also one of the answers to the crisis, that if you can't afford personal therapy and a group event has occurred that affects quite a lot of young people, that groups of, say, 5 or 10 people, each paying £5 for an hour with a group therapist, could actually get a lot of benefit from that. It's an economics that works for the therapist and also works for the group. Now, this is a bit more extreme. This is a group working without any help. And that, of course, has a massive value because it can actually bring out feelings. One of the things that society hates to talk about, feelings, the other thing being the mind. And at least these children or these actors had that chance to talk about feelings. Now, that's very valuable. Of course, it can spin out of control, but that is better than nothing. So there is another model called co-counselling, and that has come out of the person-centred tradition. In this model, you meet up with another person, and you each have 20 minutes to say what you're feeling. Then you have to stop. The other person is not allowed to talk during that 20 minutes. After your 20 minutes, the other person says what they think you said and what you felt. Okay, and they may also share a little about what they felt while you were talking. But they only have 15 to 20 minutes as well. And then it's their turn. They sit there, express their feelings, and the other person now listens and reflects. Now, that reflective capacity is a big part of making psychological contact with another person. And that's one of your foundations of any therapy, any counselling, is psychological contact. So co-counselling is another way of actually two people getting together, working with each other over time. Of course, it's not going to be as technically correct as somebody who has training, but it is better than nothing.
Yes, I mean, it's brilliant, and it gets people to actually talk about what they're feeling, which is what in these times is about, really, apart from being outraged by successive governments who don't put on the right treatments. However, we are here for you to discuss all these things. We're going to talk about bereavement, we're going to talk about eating disorders, children, all these things, and we're going to be here for you, so you can contact us. And that's how we're going to go on, and we hope we're going to do some good. Previn, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chrissy.
In These Times is entirely based on your participation and your involvement. Please use the Contact Us button on the website to let us know your thoughts. Please also make a donation so we can go on bringing you more broadcasts. Help us to help you.